Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Alternative Parties friends, we have another exciting guest on our podcast like we always do. His name is Dan Pulju, and he's running for U.S. Senate. He's going to talk to us about his campaign and other exciting stuff. So welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Hello.
Dan, let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Well, my name is Dan Pulju. I'm from Washington, D.C. I moved to Oregon about 30 years ago. I am a longtime anti-war activist. I joined the Green Party because of the Jill Stein and Ajamo Baraka campaign in 2016, because they were the most solidly anti-war candidates. I am now opposing incumbent Democrat Ron Wyden for U.S. Senate. The central theme of my campaign is that I am opposing federal government corruption. I'm not what you'd call a do-gooder in terms of opposing war on merely moral concerns, but rather also because of the effect that it has on our government, our military-industrial complex dominating everything and eroding our democracy.
That sounds good. So your opponent, you said, is, what's his name?
Ron Wyden.
Ron White. So you say he's a Democrat, right?
That's right.
Is he a progressive Democrat? Is he a blue dog Democrat? How would you describe him?
I would describe him as a moderate or maybe a blue dog, but in Oregon it's different than in other states because Oregon is a machine state. It's a blue state. It's a deep blue state. Wyden he's going to win. He's got a campaign treasury of about $6 million, probably about well over 1,000 times as much money as me. But I'll get a baseline of about 2% of the vote, and success for me would be to get 5%, because in U.S. Senate rates, that is really hard for a minor party to do, and it's rare. And it would kind of get the message out there that the minor parties are here to represent the voters that are not with the major parties.
Yes, that'd be awesome if you can get that 5%. So is the Republicans aren't running anybody?
Oh, they're running someone, but they're running a lady named Jo Rae Perkins, but she's run a few times before for statewide office and not done very well.
Okay. So the Democrat guy's likely to win then.
Wyden it would be a stunning turn of events if Wyden were to even come close to losing.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate. I don't know if you've lived on the West Coast, but we do have this dynamic of one party dominance here. The Republicans call it one party rule, and it's true.
So for this race, you mentioned earlier that you emphasize the theme of anti-corruption and also anti-war. How are you going to bring that forth in the campaign for Senate?
Well, the news kind of turned out to be on my side this year with the Russian, what they call the special operation in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And Ron Wyden was one of the Democrats who was very vocal in promoting the Russiagate narrative back in 2016. Which I believe has been demonstrated to be pure fantasy and was just propaganda from the Democrats to try to create a sort of Damocles over Donald Trump to interfere with his presidency. Ron Wyden, in my opinion, is a flaming Russophobe, and like I said before, I don't just focus on the morality of that. I was born during the Cold War. And I'm well aware of how this fear-mongering and war-mongering results in autocratic government in our own country. And I believe that the Democrats are currently much closer, though the Republicans are very close to the corporate and bureaucratic conglomerate that holds the real power in this country.
Hmm. So what do you think about the war in Ukraine? How would you handle that if you were in office?
Well, on the left, the Green Party is not supposed to be generally a left party. It's supposed to be neither left nor right, but up front, and that's the principle that I maintain. But the first thing that you have to consider with the Ukraine war is that we started it with the Euromaidan coup in 2014. I think it's pretty obvious that the U.S. State Department was heavily involved, and what happened after that was a civil war. The war between Kiev's forces and the rebels in the Donbass was caused by defections in the Ukrainian army itself. And then the Minsk Accords failed to resolve that conflict. The Russians have some good points in why they needed to invade, which they did invade. It's a complicated situation, but the United States, Washington, is in no position politically to be a party to resolving the conflict. So, as they say on the left, we have to take a hands-off approach, because this is not a problem that we can solve. This is a problem that we caused. We're causing.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, just another thought. We're causing ourselves tremendous problems with the sanctions response, which has only aggravated and renewed the supply side inflation problems that we got because of the response to COVID since 2020.
Interesting. So you believe the U.S. shouldn't do anything in this to just not boycott or sanction or intervene in any way?
The United States government is founded on the concept of intervention, and in this case, intervention is a euphemism for global dominance. Our military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about decades ago has been hell-bent on controlling the entire world, the global economy. And they interfere in everything. They overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014 because they wanted to get into the Russian sphere of influence. And it's a bit cliche, but the fact of the matter is that oil and petrol resources, natural gas, have a lot to do with that. They're trying to disrupt, in particular, the Russian gas supply to Europe, and interfere with that relationship. And in general, the U.S. government, like I said before, is more of a corporate bureaucratic partnership, and it follows those corporate interests. Corporations want to grow, and they want to control markets. So that's what our government is really doing here. They're just trying to maintain U.S. hegemony over the global petrol markets, the petrodollar, and so forth, and in general, increase their power and influence. I don't believe there's anybody really directing it, although we have neocons heavily involved in the Ukraine situation right now. But it's kind of a self-directed conglomerate, just an organization that's kind of rogue and acting on its own momentum.
One criticism people have of the media, particularly in regard to the Ukraine issue, is they believe there's more emphasis on Ukraine versus other wars, since they say it's racist because it's the white people who are being killed, and whereas people of color are being killed, and they're not being focused on that. Do you agree with that criticism of the media?
Yes, absolutely. Although, on the other hand, the media very cynically will strike a pose as being anti-racist when it finds it convenient, particularly when it comes to domestic issues. The United States military, and the media probably never mentions this to anyone, and Americans don't generally know it, but the U.S. military is still present in Syria. both in the southern portion of the country and in the east. And in the east, they'll give you one guess what it's doing, what it's been doing, through its hybrid or proxy army. The SDF has been stealing grain and oil from eastern Syria. And it's true in a lot of other countries. It just doesn't get the attention. On the other hand, eastern Ukraine, from the European perspective, Russia is not Russia is not really white people either. White supremacy is a long historical trend that you could boil it down rationally, I think, to European and European descendants in the Americas seeking to dominate the rest of the world. That's what colonialism boiled down to, and white supremacy was just a tool to advance that. The colonialism still continues. So it's never really left. But people, it's hard to get people to focus on what's going on overseas, because everyone politically, they proceed from their own self-interest first, so they care more about what's happening at home.
Okay. Our audience is a well-informed population, so I imagine people are aware of the other wars that we were talking about, how people criticize the media they're not focusing on. In case somebody isn't aware, what other wars are going on in the world right now that we should be opposing more vocally?
What I would like, if I'm going to harp on this in my campaign, I've been trying to. I don't really get a lot of media exposure just yet. But something came up a few days ago where there was an open letter written by some economists to the Biden administration to give Afghanistan its central bank's dollar reserves back. As you may be aware, the Biden administration froze Afghanistan's assets, their central bank's assets, in dollar form right after the Taliban took over. And that's an active war. It's an active, continued war. The United States has been waging war against Afghanistan since the Carter administration in 1979. It's been going on for a very, very long time. And even considering just since 9/11, people have been calling it the longest war in American history. It's disgraceful, and people need to know about that. I don't believe that public awareness is very high of the fact that Washington is holding on to that money, and it does cause a lot of humanitarian trouble in that country. They have bad winters, and they had a tough winter last winter because of that money. And of course the pretext for Washington to be holding that money is on so-called humanitarian grounds, which is ridiculous. But you mentioned the media. Yes, the media is a corporation in the United States, and they do what makes them money. They do what's profitable. So they want to entertain people. So that they give information in the form of entertainment, infotainment, and that's part of the bread and circuses that keeps the population of our country, unfortunately, happy and ignorant.
So how do people respond to your anti-war views? Are people receptive in your area, or because they're more democratic, are they opposing it? How are they receiving this?
Oh, Democrats on the West Coast and probably everywhere are really heavily still saddled with this what I think of as just open and blatant bigotry towards Russia. I view it as a form of racism. Racism is just the basic othering of another people, and it may not be on the basis of skin color, but the Russians are still these other people halfway around the world. Most people don't know anything about them, don't speak the language, and so it's very, very easy to say, well, oh, that's our enemy. Now, I'm sure you've read 1984, and nearly every, is it? Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So who would you say? You're interviewing me. Never mind that. But who, if I asked you who is the Goldstein, who's the Emmanuel Goldstein of our political climate, I think it's obviously Vladimir Putin. The fear-mongering that's done by our media and the Democrats are really heavily, they're the ones that have been pushing it politically, though the media and the corporate interests have been pushing it too. They want this enemy on the other end of the world to serve as the foil, as the fall guy to advance their agendas. It's just basic propaganda, and Vladimir Putin happens to be convenient for that role.
Interesting.
Now, getting back to your original question, I'm part of the anti-war community is large and thriving in the United States. We don't get a lot of press, but we're here, and I know the kind of people to reach, to publicize to get votes, and that's what electioneering is. Pretty much is not convincing people of things. You don't go out there and debate people. You just go out and you tell people, hey, I'm here. I represent this. Now you can vote for me if that's what you think. I believe about half the country is opposed to what they now call, and I call, our forever wars. And a lot of us, particularly from my generation that were born during the Cold War, we see right through the Russophobia and this attempt to revitalize, to reboot the Cold War in order simply to be pursuing these agendas, these power agendas, by politicians and corrupt moneyed interests here domestically. So there is a good base of people that are outside the major parties who will vote for me if they simply know about me. And so my task is just to get my name out there and just get the basics of my campaign, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's my vote.
Okay, that sounds like a wise approach. So what is your strategy for reaching the voters?
Advertising.
Advertising?
I work in polling as an interviewer. I'm not really high up in the industry, and I can't tell you who I work for, but I can tell you that a lot of it is simply a matter of testing sound bites. Things you see on political ads, they do it just like ads for any other business. They test it. They do focus groups, and polling is a large part of that. They want to find out how people react. They spend a lot of money on it because that's how they win. Is getting the ads out there, just getting the sound bites out there, getting the name of the candidate out there to as many people as possible over and over again. Now, it's expensive to run ads on television and in high markets, but I've developed ways of getting, well, first, free advertising, of course, you can get on social media, and a lot of politicians have been really clever at doing that. I can get good social media reach, and I also know how to get good reach on paid ads. I haven't started my paid ads yet, but I'm about to, and hopefully I'll be able to raise a lot more funds that way. So advertising, yes, and also endorsements from prominent people, if possible, and from organizations.
So we have people listening to the podcast, often people like yourselves who are running for office, and you're mentioning endorsements. How do you get the endorsements? What's the best way to do that?
You approach the group and say, I'm running for office in this state, and will you endorse me? You just gotta go out and just hit the street and talk to as many people as possible. Okay, so it's as simple as asking. Yeah. Now, I should mention that in Oregon, the way things work is that the minor parties have fairly easy ballot access. So I made the ballot when I was nominated in June. After that, the way our state works is they send out a voter pamphlet before the election, but you have to qualify for that voter pamphlet either with a really hefty cash fee. For U.S. Senate, it's $3,000, or by gathering signatures, which is 500 valid active voter signatures in Oregon. So we candidates tend to spend about a month and a half or 2 months just really getting out there and just sweating out getting the signatures before we get down to the advertising and endorsements and other things, because it's hard to do.
Sounds like it, yes. So you already got the signatures done? You're going to be in the pamphlet?
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's like the most important thing in our state, is to get that out there, because that goes to every voter, which is going to be about 2.9 million people. And assuming I qualify, and I turned over 130% of the required, so I'm almost surely going to qualify on signatures and not have to pay for it. So 2.9 million people will see my name, and they'll see my statement. And I made sure to write a statement that will get noticed. It seems a bit radical, but it's hopefully addressed toward the right type of voter, to say, if you're disgusted with the federal government, believe the federal government is corrupt, that we need to end these wars, et cetera, then I'm your candidate. And I'll get some votes that way. The problem is they only send it out about 2 weeks before the election. And unfortunately, but at that point, only about maybe 5%, 10% of the voters are still in play, at least between the Republicans and the Democrats. A lot of people have made up their mind, and some of them have already voted absentee.
That sounds like a great advertising opportunity, so I tip my hat to you for getting that. And you say that goes out 2 weeks before the election? You say that goes out 2 weeks before the election?
2 or 3 weeks, and then voting starts right after. So,
okay.
And it's also a big pamphlet, and not everybody's going to read all the way through it. So obviously my task is to get my name out there however I can in other ways, including on this podcast. And I hope it has good reach. But specifically, I got to target people in my own state, of course, and that besides social media, there's traditional means, newspapers, radio. I've gotten some quotes that are fairly inexpensive on radio. I'm not going to raise a whole ton of money, but I'm hoping that if all goes well, I can actually raise enough to have to report it. The FEC reporting threshold is $5,000.
Yeah, that'd be a good mark to meet.
Yeah, so I'm not new at this. I was a volunteer on a fairly high level for the Stein and Baraka campaign, and that was when I learned that even Jill Stein and Najama Baraka, and I was phone banking for them. When you call people, and I was calling people that were not registered Greens. Registered Greens are maybe like 1%, less than 1% of all voters. And so the other voters, they're all out there. And we're talking about half the voters here that are not Republicans and Democrats. And a lot of the ones that are Republicans and Democrats are only grudgingly so. They want to vote in the primaries, but they don't really like those parties. And so they're there, and they're ready to vote for us minor parties, but we just got to get to them. We got to cross that divide and let them know that we're here to vote for them.
Yes, and the election is in November, like all the elections, right?
Yep.
All right. It's coming up then. We're in the middle of August now, so it's coming up.
Yep, 3 months, and I've got that keenly in mind. I've got about 90 days left.
That's good.
Now, there's one other thing that I consider this year a good opportunity to advance the anti-imperial interest because of the economic effect that we're now seeing. I mentioned I work in polling, but if you read the polls yourself, you find the issue questions, what matters most to people. This year, it's inflation. When we have these economic troubles, the economy always comes first, and it's inflation. Now we got a recession too. Technically, there are people arguing about it. Democrats try to say, "Oh no, it's not really a recession." Change the definition and whatnot, but that's what the voters care about. And it's almost like entertainment running as a candidate. You got to give them what they want, and what they want is to hear about how you're going to fix the economy. So I'm going to fix the economy by stopping these deliberate steps that the federal government has taken to destroy it. First during the lockdown years and the restrictions of the COVID years since 2020, and now with the disruption of global supplies during the Ukraine war. These adversarial stances that we take towards other countries are clearly self-destructive. And they've destroyed our freedoms domestically, the Patriot Act and so forth, for decades. But now people will hopefully see also how they have been harming our economy and harming our daily lives.
Sure. So Dan, for our audience out there, how can they support your campaign?
You can go to danforsenate.org. That's danforsenate.org. I've got a handy donation button right at the top of the page. You can volunteer. Another thing you can do is go to Facebook, my Facebook page, Dan Pulju for USSenate.org, and invite your friends to follow it. That's the free outreach that I was talking about before. You can get thousands, tens of thousands of people per week just to see your name and to see your position simply by building up a good solid network. I don't know what you think of Donald Trump, whether you love him or hate him, but he was a real genius at getting that free press on particularly on Twitter. Never had to pay a dime for it.
Good point. And he's the one who needs it the least.
Now someone's gonna go claiming that I called Trump a genius, but he was a genius at that, and not
Evil
the first
genius.
one. He was good at, sure, okay. Well, I don't think of him as good or evil. But,
okay.
And I only hope one day that I will be as important enough that someone would need to attack me like that.
Sure. Good point. Dan, thank you kindly for coming on the podcast today. We wish you all the best in your campaign and all your other future personal and professional endeavors.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Sure thing. All the best. Take care.
All right, see you, Andrew.
Bye now.
Bye.